Now for something completely different. This is a crash introduction to marketing science, and to make sure I give you value, I promise I'll give you some more reasons why targeting can be very harmful for brands, and I'll answer these two questions. Do small brands sell to niche segments, achieving extra loyalty, or do large brands achieve their size by capturing the most desirable, heaviest customers? And these sort of questions are really important. Having the answers to these questions, having this sort of knowledge is, I think, the path to getting marketing people the respect that corporations give to their finance people, their operations people. I mean, I don't think there's probably a marketer in this room who feels that the CEO gives marketing the respect they should. And it's often put forward that the solution to that is, we've got to talk in dollars more. Well, that's helpful. But no, the real reason that people like the finance office and the operations officer get respect is because they have knowledge that is specialist, unique to their discipline, and the CEO doesn't know about that. It's not just all subjectivity. So this is my big idea, that we've got to move on and create some real knowledge. We've got to move our discipline into the scientific era, because we're very medieval at the moment. And history has taught us that theories that aren't based on scientific laws invariably turn out to be wrong. They're often dangerous, they can be fatal. For example, the best and brightest in society, doctors, for 2,000 years were influenced by theories that came out of ancient Greece. Hippocrates, father of Western medicine, he borrowed from Plato through analogy. Plato had this idea that there were 4 elements in the world, and so Hippocrates said, well, they're matched by 4 humours in the human body. And for 2,000 years, medicine was based on the idea of a theory of humoral imbalance. Sickness is caused by humours being out of balance. Doctor intervenes by getting them back into balance by all sorts of popular things like bleeding. And for 2,000 years, the net contribution of doctors to society was to shorten people's lives. And these are really bright people who thought they knew a lot, but they got it completely wrong because they weren't doing any scientific research, which sounds a bit like marketing today. So I'm just going to introduce the concept of science. I'm going to introduce you to some scientific laws that we've discovered in marketing. What are scientific laws? They're the stuff you learned at high school, right? About Victorian scientists who got out of their ivory towers and went out into the real world and made repeated observations. And they saw some things that kept happening. And they started to wonder, does this happen up a mountain as well as down a mountain? Does this happen in a different country? Does this happen in summer as well as winter? And they're looking for patterns that generalize across a whole lot of conditions. And when you discover those, you have what we call a scientific law. And of course it leads to prediction. Because if you know this keeps applying in all these conditions, you can make predictions. In fact, that's the only time you can make predictions. And it leads to explanation as well, because you know all these factors don't affect it. And maybe you know some boundary conditions, some factors that do affect it. Right? So it leads to explanation about how the world works. And then scientists create theories. Right? Real scientific theory comes later, based on the laws. And theory is just basically a story that weaves the laws together, like Darwin's mechanism of natural selection explains evolution, weaves together 3 particular laws. So how are medieval theories developed, right? Because there were universities in medieval days, right? And lots of scholars, they sat around drinking wine, having a talk. How did they come up with theories? Well, they used intuition. They used reasoning by analogy, like Hippocrates. 4 elements out in the real world must be matched by 4 humours in the body. Metaphor. They used common sense. It's common sense that the sun moves through the sky and the earth is the centre of the universe. Of course, that's common sense. They used experience, which is another way of saying non-systematic, intermittent biased observations. And armchair thought experiments, and I'm going to show you some of these that have been done in marketing. And argument. Academics love to argue, as do a lot of practical people as well. Right? And humans have this amazing capacity to come up with theories. And 99.9% of them are complete bunk. Right? Only the ones built on laws, only the ones that weave laws together actually tend to work. So let's have a look at some marketing theory. Here's something, textbooks don't actually say very much, really. Other than telling you there's things like TV and radio and media agents, there's not much as far as scientific principles. But here's something that textbooks actually do say. You know, like you might go, I want to grow. Should I grow by stopping my customers leaving, or shall I acquire some new ones? And here textbooks say, well, it's much cheaper to stop people leaving. Right? We've all heard this. And in fact, there's this line, a 5% reduction in defection can deliver staggering increases in profitability. And that was published in Harvard Business Review twice. And it's rubbish. And you don't have to take my word. Just read the article. That's all you have to do. If you just go beyond the title, beyond the text, actually read it, you can see how they came up with this argument. And because it's classically medieval, it's not based on any research whatsoever. It's purely based on an armchair experiment. I'll just describe it to you, first of all. This is how it goes. They said, what if there was a company and it lost 10% of its customers every year? Well, that means the average customer would stay for 10 years. And to keep the math simple, they said, well, let's say that over those 10 years, the customer gives the company $10,000. Okay, here goes the experiment. What if we could reduce that defection from 10% to 5%? Well, then the average customer stays longer. They stay for 20 years. If they're giving us money every year, that would add up to more. Ta-da! What does this tell us about? This is a bit like saying, if you bought a lottery ticket and it won, you'd be richer. Yes, that is true. Well, it doesn't actually tell me much. There's an assumption here that you can notice that moving from 10% to 5%, there's a bit of sleight of hand there, there's a bit of magician's trick. Moving from 10 to 5% defection is halving defection. And they made other little assumptions, like you do it for free by magic. They assume it's possible too. Now, is it possible? I'm going to show you a pattern that we see in the real world, and that is when we look at loyalty metrics like defection, and we look at brands of massively different market share sizes, we don't see much difference. Right? This is cars defection. Cars is a great category, right? Lots of loyalty to cars. About 50% chance when you buy a car, you buy the same one you bought last time. Right? There's loyalty, which we see in every category. But the point is, it doesn't vary much by any brand. Right? No matter what they do, they're doing all sorts of different marketing strategies, they've got different agencies, different things, it doesn't matter. They don't change their loyalty. The only time the loyalty changes is if you massively increase your customer base. For any of these brands, to half their defection would mean to get to 25%. You see anyone with 25% there? I mean, Ford is a little bit close. I'm still actually quite a long way from it, but Ford is the closest. But if you notice, Ford has double the market share in this market to its nearest competitor. It's about 20 times bigger than most of those brands there. So saying half your defection is about parallel to saying just increase the size of your customer base by about 40 or 50 times. That's all. And then it will happen. So look, what I'm referring to now is a scientific law that explains or predicts levels of loyalty, but textbooks usually don't know about it. In fact, they are very medieval. They talk about that loyalty could be all sorts of different things. It just depends on what strategy you want to follow. For example, here's two hypothetical brands of the same market share. This one, Delicious, has 32% of the market buying it in a year. Those people buy it 3 times a year, and that gives it 14% share in this market. Okay, here's have a look at another brand that's 14% share. This one has only 16% penetration, so it's half the size of its customer base. So those customers have to buy twice as often to give you 14% market share. Yes? Numbers add up. Looks all perfectly theoretically possible, but this never happens. The real world does not behave like this. You can write this in a textbook, they do. There are even arguments in textbooks, which brand would you rather be? Which is classically, medieval, like people arguing about how many angels can fit on the top of a pinhead. We can argue about that, but it doesn't matter because it doesn't happen. It does not happen. What we see in the real world is when we look at brands of differing market shares, we see massive differences in the size of their customer base. And when we start looking at loyalty metrics, we don't see much difference. But what we do see, the red arrow is a bit of a clue, is that bigger brands have slightly higher loyalty than smaller brands. And brands of similar size, like Caltex and Ampol there, will have similar penetrations and they'll have similar loyalty metrics. So your loyalty is set depending on how big you are. If you're smaller, you have slightly lower loyalty, but not much lower. Main thing is you have much smaller customer base. And this is called the double jeopardy law. Why have textbooks and practitioners right? And people peddling loyalty schemes and CRM and promising huge increases in loyalty, etc. Why have they missed this? Because marketing is largely based on medieval theories, not on science, and we need to move beyond that. Here's another example of a medieval theorist. He runs an ad agency.
The brands that can move to that emotional level, that can create loyalty beyond reason, are going to be the brands where premium profits lie.
So we figured out what the answer was, that there was something in outstanding brands.
What sets Robert's big idea apart from his competitors is its boldness. He claims he has discovered the formula to turn nearly any product into an object of devotion.
That there were brands that connected, and there were brands that people loved. They didn't like them, they didn't admire them, they didn't respect them, they didn't use them. None of that wimpy-wumpy stuff. They loved them.
Roberts calls his big idea love marks.
What is a love mark?
A love mark is a brand that has created loyalty beyond reason, that's infused with mystery, sensuality, and intimacy.
Infused with mystery, what's that? Sensuality and intimacy. This is actually not a big idea. It's not even a new idea. Almost every ad agency on the planet has peddled this idea at some point. But anyway, how did Roberts come up with this? You know, what research did he do? Well, here's an interview at Knowledge at Wharton where he explains how this theory was built on a solid bedrock of scientific laws.
I live in Tribeca in New York, and my wife's in New Zealand. They're kind of a long way apart. So I was there unloved. My wife wasn't there. Alan didn't like my idea. So I opened a couple of bottles of red wine and was doodling around, as you do, at 2:30 in the morning. And instead of trust marks, I started to draw a little heart. Okay? And I saw heart and marks and then love marks. I thought, man, I got it. This is so simple. What's the deepest emotion of all? So I went to bed, 8:30 in the morning, passed the 8:30 test, called up Alan and said, man, you got to come back. He wrote a cover story about 3 weeks later on love marks and that's how it was born. It was then tested, we proved it, we researched it, we figured it, we kind of backfilled all the data into the concept, which you wouldn't do at Knowledge Wharton, but it's what we did.
So this is classically medieval. This is a symposium. A symposium means when you get together and drink wine and chat, but then he did it by himself. Okay. But it's the same concept. You can propel your loyalty through the roof. This is actually using just metaphor. This is using the metaphor of human relations and going, well, that's how human beings, interact at certain levels, so we just move that through to marketing. How does this translate to marketing? Let's take the analogy and move it across to marketing. Let's do it the other way. It doesn't work that well, does it? What about Apple and Harley-Davidson? These are the poster children for loyalty. This is an analysis of Harley buyers. Harley owners buy Harley-Davidson about 1/3 of the time. In other words, 2/3 of their purchases are other motorbikes. They seem happy to switch to other brands as well. Perfectly normal, exactly what we see, exactly what you just saw in the petrol data. Let's have a look at loyalty rates for Apple. Here's repeat rates. All right, there's Dell on 71%. There's Apple. Oh. Right. Okay. Actually, that repeat rate is slightly higher for Apple than you expect for their market share, slightly deviation from double jeopardy, but that's because you have to switch software and operating systems if you want to move away from Apple. Here's an analysis of Harley-Davidson's buyers. Biggest segment there are people who say, most of the time my bike is just parked, I like wearing a helmet, I don't know other people who ride motorbikes. Not exactly a Harley-Davidson loyalist. Well, let's have a look at that small 10% segment. Now, this is people who agree with these statements. I like tattoo, beer, I don't read books. At least likely to have bought their bike new, probably most likely to have stolen it in any segment. And they're only 3.5% of sales revenue, right? Not worth much to. In fact, the most loyal Harley-Davidson buyers are worth the least to the company, and there aren't many of them. And I'm running out of time, so I think I'm not going to tell you about too much about the natural monopoly law. So we're running out of time. But the natural monopoly law is another law which... which says that if you want to be a bigger brand, you will end up with a bigger brand has more of its customers who are light category buyers. If you want to target heavy category buyers, that's another way of saying, let's get small. Because that's what small brands have. They skew to heavy category buyers. What do these laws mean? If you put them together and some other laws, you get a picture of marketing that is about loyally switching consumers who don't care about brands much. They're extremely good at navigating supermarkets with 30,000 items and buying 5. And not seeing 99.9% of the stuff that's there because they want to get on with their lives. So marketing turns out to not be about differentiation and persuasion and winning loyalists and tribe members. It's largely about building mental and physical availability, and that's what built all the big brands of the world so far. It is a constant ongoing battle for attention, not love. So a final word on a bright future for marketing. This comes from Joe Tripodi, Chief Marketing Officer of Coca-Cola in Atlanta. Science has revolutionized every other discipline. I mean, just think of other disciplines like dentistry, engineering. Everything has been transformed because of science. Now is marketing's turn. I think that's a really bright future for marketing and will finally give us the respect that we've desired for so long. Thank you.